War III, and this is all surrounding the United States, Russia, NATO, and Ukraine. And let me know your thoughts. Are we going to be entering into World War III? Yes, or do you think no? Or there's a lot of people saying we've already started World War III. We don't realize it. It just has not yet been officially announced. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, but take a look at the latest headlines coming out in just the past 24 hours. Putin remarks shows World War III has crept up, says a Russian newspaper. And again, this just coming out today, and this one coming out yesterday. World War III brewing. Russia accuses NATO of practicing nuclear strikes on country. B-52 spotted. I'm going to be sharing with you that. And also, take a look at this. We will not fight a war against Russia in Ukraine, the president said soon after Russia's invasion in spring of 2022. So when it first started, they said a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia is World War III and something we must strive to prevent. But here we are today. I'm going to be sharing with you the video footage in the last 24 hours of U.S. Secretary Anthony Blinken saying it is time for the United States to consider allowing Ukraine to use U.S. weapons and Western weapons to attack Russia, which Russia is saying will equate to an escalated conflict, and many are saying World War III. Now, I actually just shared with you how circulating around the news media outlets right now is that potential World War III could be sparked between the U.S., China, and Taiwan, with the conflict happening in the Pacific. We're hearing China will be soon attacking Taiwan, and when they do, the United States, we're hearing, will support them. China furious over this, and China saying we have cyber attackers ready to do direct attacks against infrastructure systems for the United States. You can expect these cyber attacks when that war begins, and you can also potentially expect that to become World War III as well. So a lot of conflict taking place.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Prague this morning as part of a multi-day meeting with NATO foreign ministers. Earlier at a press conference with the president of Moldova, Blinken made headlines by leaving the door open to a key shift in U.S. policy, allowing Ukraine to fire American weapons in a Russian Federation territory.
We haven't encouraged or enabled strikes outside of Ukraine. Ukraine, as I've said before, has to make its own decisions about the best way to effectively.
For the latest, let's go to Claudio Vanga. Good morning, Claudio. Why are these remarks significant?
Good morning, Francis. Well, even just the idea that the United States would allow Ukraine to use American-made weapons to attack Russia was completely unthinkable up to 2 years ago at the start of the war, when President Biden continued or repeatedly asked Zelensky not to do that for fear that it would lead to an escalation between NATO and Russia and then possibly to World War III. But nowadays, the U.S. administration is at least being very careful about that, or cautious, because you've got John Kirby, the spokesperson for the National Security Council, saying that there is no change in that policy. But then, as you heard, Anthony Blinken on Wednesday said that the U.S. is ready to adjust and adapt according to the conditions on the battleground. And the conditions on the battleground right now is that Ukraine is finding it very difficult to fend off Russia's attacks. Now, the question is, how would Russia react? Well, on Tuesday, Vladimir Putin told reporters constant escalation can lead to serious consequences in Europe. How will the United States behave, bearing in mind our parity in the field of strategic weapons? And of course, Francis, with that, he's referring also to nuclear weapons. Back to you, Francis.
Now, as always, link in the description below to this article that just came out today that says Putin remarks shows World War III has crept up. Russian newspaper. Now, the article says a third world war has crept up unnoticed. A prominent Russian newspaper has said after Russian President Vladimir Putin warned long-range strikes launched into Russia from Ukraine would pull NATO countries closer to direct confrontation with Moscow. And we're hearing, as I mentioned, Poland and other NATO nations giving the green light for Ukraine to do so. And we're also hearing the U.S., who has been the biggest opponent of this, now saying they're taking it into consideration. More than 2 years of full-scale fighting in Ukraine has brought the possibility of another global conflict to the fore. NATO countries are eager to tamp down on the possibility of the violence spreading beyond the country's border. When providing military aid and weapons to Ukraine, they have been clear that they are assisting Kiev's defense against Moscow's forces, not being a part of the war. However, This hasn't prevented the hostilities from becoming Europe's largest armed conflict since World War II. NATO nations have increasingly come out in favor of permitting Ukraine to use Western-supplied weapon systems to strike into internationally recognized Russian territory. The U.S., the most vocal opponent of Western weapons reaching beyond Ukraine's border, has indicated this week that it may adapt and adjust its policies, but has not yet lifted its restrictions on Kiev. Earlier this week, Russian President Vladimir Putin said NATO countries, especially the ones based in Europe, particularly in small European countries, should be fully aware of what is at stake by allowing Ukraine to strike inside Russia with donated weapons. Major warnings coming out about world